Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Dean Elizabeth Cronk-Warner and the entire law school community, we welcome those attending here in person as well as those online. We have about 200 people online and about 30 here in person for a great conversation. We're looking forward to it. Today's panel will explore the intersections of civility, professionalism, and well-being. My name is Brian Burton. I am the Assistant Dean of Student Affairs here at the College of Law. As we begin, I do want to acknowledge that this is the ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. Just in terms of a few housekeeping items for CLE credit, for those who are in person attending, you should have scanned the QR code as you entered the moot courtroom here today. For those attending online, you are required to stay online for the entire duration of the presentation of the panel for the full hour in order to receive your CLE credit. If for some reason you get disconnected, please contact the College of Law so we can get you reconnected and get your CLE credit. We will have time at the conclusion of this panel presentation for any questions. We will be utilizing Slido. Please input your questions on Slido. If you'll go to slido.com and the password is civility, you'll be able to enter in your questions there. And if you see questions that are particularly meaningful to you, you can vote them up and they will go up in order for us to get to with the time that we have for Q&A. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor James Holbrook, who will be moderating our panel this afternoon. Jim Holbrook is a clinical professor of law who teaches negotiation, mediation, and arbitration. He has practiced law for over 30 years, is a master mediator, and importantly, holds a JD from the University of Utah College of Law, where he graduated 50 years ago this May. Most importantly, Jim is an extraordinary colleague, a professional. Please join me in thanking Jim as we introduce our panelists. And briefly, I would also like to thank our panelists and introduce them by name. We are pleased to have with us today Martha Knudson, who is a well-being expert and member of the Utah State Bar Well-Being Committee, Samantha Frazier, an attorney here in Salt Lake City, Shalise McKinlay, a paralegal here in the Valley, and one of our own second-year law students, Parker Airmet. We are also pleased to be joined virtually by Mr. Marc Risman from Las Vegas, who is also a University of Utah alum and a practicing attorney. So we will turn the time over to Jim and look forward to a great conversation. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Marc, would you be willing to share with us some thoughts about the two horrible murders in Las Vegas yesterday and how you think that that relates to well-being and what are the consequences with respect to well-being of that tragic incident?
Well, and I apologize. I prepared for a discussion on civility and professional courtesy, and yesterday's tragic incident plays right into that. Am I off topic, sir?
No, not at all. I think we would appreciate hearing from you about this.
Well, of course, it's a tragedy, but there's great lessons to be learned from this. As we'll get into later, exercising professional courtesy and civility toward everybody, whether it's bailiffs, jury members, opposing counsel, opposing parties, and certainly, as was addressed earlier, people in your own staff or people, your co-workers. One of the keys to civility and professional courtesy is to not get involved emotionally in your cases with your clients or in any even transactional work you're doing. When you get emotionally involved, there is a strong tendency in human nature to throw professional courtesy, civility, and diplomacy to the side. And that's what happened in yesterday's tragedy. You had the first victim, Dennis Prince, outstanding PI lawyer, recently married, recently the father of a child, representing his new wife in a child custody case, which was out of his normal field for his current wife, in a deposition against the father of the subject minor, the ex-husband of Mr. Prince's wife. Mr. Prince can be an aggressive lawyer, which is normally great. You can be a zealous advocate and not be, and still maintain courtesy toward the other side. When I say the other side, I mean toward the opposing advocate and the opposing parties. But when you're involved like Dennis was, where he was representing his wife, and he wanted to stand up not only as a great attorney, but a great husband, some of that may have left throughout the course of this litigation. On the other hand, you had Joe Houston, who is the shooter who then tragically killed himself, who was representing his son, and it involved his grandson. And again, in that kind of situation, civility, professional courtesy goes out the window. If in your current or future practices, you can avoid representing a family member or a loved one or a best friend where you may get emotionally involved in the case, or even if it's a disinterested third party you're representing, but for some reason you make it personal, get out of the case. That's what I suggest, because it's very difficult in those situations, as we saw yesterday, to practice civility and professional courtesy. And that goes for judges also, because we have cases here in Nevada, and I'm sure also in Utah and throughout the country, where a disgruntled party gets mad. It happens often in family law cases, where maybe the judge not only makes unfavorable rulings, but isn't exactly courteous to the losing party, and tragedy happens. So if we're going to tie it into health, certainly staying alive is a big part of being healthful in the profession. But I would say the one lesson I think you should take away from here, besides exercising civility, professional courtesy at all times to everybody you come in contact with, socially and professionally, that if you get personally involved in a case or with a client, even with the best efforts, sometimes professional courtesy and civility go out the window. So I'm going to urge you, if possible, to avoid those situations at all costs.
Thank you, Mark. Martha, you mentioned that you work with organizations, law firms, law schools. What do you do? What do you tell them about how to build a culture of professionalism in their organization?
There's quite a few things that an organization can and should do when looking to build a resilient culture that supports professionalism and civility. But the one that I will touch on, and that's important for law students to know about as you enter the field, is really the idea of connection. So the way that we treat each other really has an impact on our brains. So your mind is your biggest moneymaker, right? As a lawyer, if we are in a toxic environment in an organization, we actually get dumber, because our brains, you don't even know you're doing it. Your brain is spinning in the background, trying to understand, looking for signs that you belong, that you're not, that somebody's mad or not. We just do this. This is a human trait. So with our organizations, our groups that we're in, the biggest priority is respectful communication, and making sure that the people on your teams, in your group, feel that they belong. And that's a two-way street. That is not just on everybody to make everyone else feel they belong, but we also have a duty to, second guess our assumptions about things. So, we're really talking about building these high quality connections. So for each of us, it's important that we understand when we're relating to each other, and this can be in your organization, this can be when you're practicing, that only 7% of the message that you're conveying is through words. The rest of it is body language and tone of voice. So, check in with yourself, be aware. And in our like law firms, that's a really important thing. I have a story for that, in a second. But the other thing to be aware of is our own perceptions of what's going on. It's really easy to get carried away with our thoughts and jump to conclusions based on the messages that we're getting, right? And we're not always right. So that's what I'm saying. It's a two-way street where the organization and the individual were co-creating a condition that allows us to thrive. So I got a really big wake-up call on this when I was a pretty young associate in my law firm. I had the best assistant ever. She was awesome. And I got I don't even remember. That's probably how no big of a deal it was. But I got something from opposing counsel that came over my desk early in the morning. And it was so stupid and infuriating. And at least it was to me at that time in my practice. And my secretary came in and I went and I just ranted about this to her. Oh my gosh, no. And I didn't say anything to her about her or anything she did or didn't do, but she started to cry. And I was completely like flabbergasted, like, what? Are you okay? And she's like, I'm so sorry. And it was at that point that I realized the way I was communicating my frustration about this situation that had nothing to do with her was taking a big toll on her, and her ability to want to work for me, to feel good at work. And I'm so glad that we were able to wrap that up and I learned a huge lesson. And so that carries forward outside of your organizations, but also into your practice with others and your interactions with colleagues and clients and judges and the rest. The way that we communicate, even if you don't necessarily care about the other person, it comes back to you because we are always creating this environment that we then have to swim in professionally.
Thank you. Samantha, will you share with us some tips, some practices, some disciplines that you use, to promote your own well-being?
Sure. So I'll talk about some things that I kind of put into practice when I was in law school that I've kind of carried on and maybe transitioned. Is that my first year at law school was really, really tough. I was first generation lawyer, so I went to a law school that was heavy about advocacy, and a lot of people had parents who were lawyers or uncles who were lawyers, and so I kind of felt like a fish out of water. So my first year at law school, I didn't do anything but study. I didn't go to any happy hours. I didn't go to any lunches. I was like, I'm going to kill it. So when all of my section class, they were like, hey, we're going to lunch. I was like, ha, sillies. I'm going to the library. And so I just stayed in the library all the time. And when I got my grades, they did not reflect my library grades, my library time. And I just did not understand it. And it really messed with my well-being. And then I had to reevaluate. And I realized that for me, breaks work better than me being in the library 24 hours a day. And that I read a study that basically said after a certain amount of hours, you are actually at a detriment when you're studying because your brain is not really retaining information, and that you need a time to like rest your brain so that it's kind of like a computer, so it can like restart for the next day with a fresh start. And so I kind of incorporated that. And so what I started doing was, for me, on Sundays, I would say, okay, I need to go to church. Like I need from Sundays from 8 to noon, I'm just going to do something for myself. Like that is something for me. And it really helped me recognize that, one, I wasn't so resentful of law school because I didn't feel like it was taking every single ounce away from me, that I was just dedicating all this and not getting anything back. But it also gave my brain time to like rest and like restart. So even now, as I practice, I always give myself like one day off. Some days, you know, when you're preparing for trial, that may be harder to do. But even if you say, Saturday, I'm not going to look at any emails, I'm not going to do anything, I'm just going to do something with my family, or I'm going to do something for myself. I'm going to watch trash reality TV. I want to see what happens with Scandival and Vanderpump Rules, okay? Like, even though you think, oh, in the back of your mind, you'll start to feel guilty, right? But kind of suppress that a little bit to give yourself a treat, because the next day you will feel like, okay, I'm ready to work. Like, I was off, I'm ready to do this thing. Another thing that I do is I try to set boundaries for my emails, so I don't get notifications after a certain period of time on emails. If I want to go in and check, that's on me. But remember that, you know, what are you going to do at 10 p.m. at night for a client or for your professor? If you didn't turn in that paper by now, it's late. Okay, guys? So I just think that setting healthy boundaries, giving yourself cutoff times, knowing what you need in order to refresh your brain will help you be a better law student and a better lawyer.
Thank you. Shalise, will you give us some advice or some experience about the professional benefits of getting a paralegal involved with the lawyer working with the client?
I'd be happy to. I think that it's very important to make sure that your client has a similar level of respect for your paralegal going into the case. And so I think that tone is set by you from the get-go. I think that as an attorney, the paralegal helps you and is instrumental in being able to collect all of the documentation from your client, and is also a good resource for being that person that your client can call instead of taking up all of your time getting to the root of whatever their needs are. Your paralegal is able to do that. And so if the client has a level of trust in your paralegal and a level of respect that they are going to be able to give them the basically complete tasks in a way that is going to help them and benefit them in the long run, I think that that's very helpful. And I think that the attorneys are huge in making that process possible. I've had experience with some attorneys where the only interaction initially that I have with a client is, hey, this is my paralegal and she's really good at getting documentation. And in a way that sends a message that that's all I'm good for. And so I think the way that you convey the level of respect that you have for your paralegal to the client makes a difference in how the process goes from then on out. So did that answer?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Parker, let me ask the same question of you that I asked Samantha. What are your tips or advice or suggestions about how law students can protect their well-being while they're in school?
Everything that Samantha said. I think take breaks, make sure that you have a support system. And honestly, use the campus resources. I think those are huge. There's, an embedded counselor here, Sierra, who's amazing, who is here to just be with law students. And I think that's amazing. And it's free for law students. Dean Burton and Natasha's, they're so committed to your success. And I've even been in their offices to just talk, and I'm sure they don't get paid enough for that, but that's a different issue. But honestly, I think you got to take breaks. You got to make sure that you have people around you that support you, and then use the resources that are out there. Obviously, shameless plug for Students Helping Students, and using the things that we put out. It's not enough, but we're trying. It's the first year, so give us a break. And I don't know, like, find those people that really do build you up. Find those people that support you and make you feel good. And it doesn't even have to be at the law school. It can be, your family. I would say my wife and my 3-year-old and my 11-month-old are, the people that I, decompress with the best, obviously. And they're not at the law school ever, which is great. I can kind of separate those two worlds, but you gotta stop sometimes. You gotta set boundaries for yourself. If you don't, you'll either burn out or just be mean or bad at your job. And I think all those outcomes are bad. So just take breaks, use the resources that we have, and find those people, those good people that you can surround yourself with.
Thank you. Marc, you've been very successful practicing law, and I'm sure that you've come up against opponents, opposing lawyers, who don't treat you respectfully. They're overly aggressive, they're insulting, they're Rambo lawyers. How do you maintain your professionalism when you're dealing with a jerk?
Well, you always try to take the high road. The bottom line is, in a community like Salt Lake or Las Vegas, if you're going to be a career attorney, it's likely you're going to run into those opposing counsel, those judges, again, at least sometime in the future. And you need to almost prepare that you're not off on the wrong foot with them for something 3 years down the line by retaliating or acting back today. It's kind of a bite your tongue type thing. But again, I have recently had a litigation, and I think it was settled. I think both attorneys are glad it's settled, and our clients were pleased. But it was a relatively new regional firm in town. They were very aggressive and very strong advocates, and maybe believed in filing more motions than necessary and running up bills on both sides. But ironically, they exercised great professional courtesy and great civility when they did it. It was kind of like smiling in your face when they were stabbing you in the back. But no, they didn't do anything unethical. And I was so impressed with their advocacy, even though it was maybe a little aggressively directed against my client, and that I would have no hesitancy if I had a conflict in the future in recommending that firm or associating with that firm if I had a case that required co-counsel. So that's a great example of strong advocacy, but mixed with civility, professional courtesy, and diplomacy. And just one thing I'm going to throw out in case I don't have the opportunity. Here in Nevada, the state bar formed a civility committee. And if the Utah bar doesn't have it already, I know this might not be anything that the law students could have a say-so in, but maybe the panel members or other practicing attorneys can try to get a civility committee in the state bar and give them a platform to reach out to other lawyers, because it's such an important tool and skill for you to have in the practice of law, in my opinion.
Thank you. Our state Supreme Court a number of years ago took the lead in this and developed standards of professionalism and civility that are mandatory. And in fact, we have a CLE requirement that we have to have professionalism and civility CLE credits every cycle. And in fact, this CLE has been approved for professionalism CLE credit. I want to throw out a question to the panel. When I was a law student, I never heard the expression of imposter syndrome. I knew that I was an inexperienced lawyer, and sometimes when somebody would ask me a question, I felt like I wanted to tell them, you should go see a lawyer. But that was because I was inexperienced. And so I want to know from all of you, is there such a thing as the imposter syndrome, and what is it, and how does it affect law students or young lawyers?
Yes, there is something that is the imposter syndrome. Let me first tell you what it's not. It's not feeling like unsure or doubtful about certain abilities or things from time to time. That's not what it is. Imposter syndrome is something where your perception of your own ability or your own abilities is so out of whack with your actual abilities that it causes you to not take on certain challenges that you might otherwise take on. And it causes a lot of mental and emotional ill health. The interesting thing about imposter syndrome is that it is very common in high achievers like lawyers and law students. That it is estimated, the data show that about 70% or more of us have experienced this from time to time. So if you sometimes feel like an imposter, you are not alone. And there's a lot of us that feel like that sometimes. I am somebody that I still have days where, like, I was at the top of my game, general counsel of a national company, and I'd have days that are like, is today the day that the jig is up? Everybody's going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing. Is that accurate? No, but that's, it's a distortion that we all can have. So it's common. Pay attention to it, and if it's really impacting things like your stress levels, it can increase your procrastination. If you find that you're afraid to ask for help because somebody might think you're dumb, like these are all signs that you need to talk to somebody about this stuff. It could be you're not taking on challenges because you think you can't do it, things like that.
Parker, I saw you shaking your head. You want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that from my own experience, like I was waitlisted here at the U and then got on right before signing a lease to go somewhere else for law school. So, even from day one, I thought, well, everyone else got in and I barely got in because someone else said no. And so I started off from that kind of baseline of, everyone else knows and I don't. And so I'm going to try and stay low, try and, not, let them know that I don't belong here. But that's just not the case. It's just not. Everyone, they do such a good job at finding really good people to be here at school. If you can make it through a year of law school, you belong anywhere, honestly. You've put in the work, you put in the time, it's tough. And I think that when it does start to affect you, you really do need to look for help. If you're I don't know, like Martha said, if it's affecting your stress levels, if you find yourself thinking that I am the one in this room that doesn't belong here, then talk to someone about it. And that's not just kind of a fluffy thing. You should talk to somebody about it, because I can guarantee you that those 70% of us that have felt this way will assure you that you do belong here. And the 30% of people that haven't felt that are probably wrong, because maybe those 30% don't belong here. They're the rude ones that make everyone else feel bad. So, but honestly, just reach out. There's so many resources, and you do belong here, and you do belong in the room, even if sometimes you don't know what you're doing.
Samantha, you had.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I had imposter syndrome before it was a thing, right? So I told you guys how I was first generation and I didn't feel like I belonged in law school, and my first year grades didn't really reflect, but I didn't tell you the rest of the story. So I went to the dean and I was crying, profusely, just crying. And I was like, I just can't do this. I have to get out of here. I don't belong here. I tried to withdraw from law school twice. No kidding. Filled out the paperwork the first time. The dean went to admissions or went to the registrar and asked them to pull my withdrawal slip. And she explained to me, she said, Samantha, I'm going to be honest with you. Law school is a different animal. You're used to being the special unicorn in your class who always gets straight A's and everyone tells you how smart you are. But guess what? Every special unicorn is in your class. You're at the cream of the crop. Everyone was at the top of their class that's in law school. And so you're competing with a bunch of A students. So it doesn't mean that you belong. It doesn't mean that you don't belong. You just have to understand that the group that you're in now, we're all competing, and that's okay. But you belong just like anybody else in that seat, because she said, I looked over the applications, and if you didn't belong, you wouldn't be here. They don't let everyone in law school. So I think that you just have to remind yourself sometimes that, hey, there is an admission process. They don't take everyone. So if you're sitting in a seat and you have a seat deposit, you belong. So just remind yourself of that.
Oops, can I jump in on this really quick? One thing to think about, especially when you are in law school, is get a little perspective on things. Think back on day one, what you were able to do and what you knew at that point. And then think about right now, like what you're able to do. Focus on those wins. You are learning and growing, and that's how it is your entire career. So, just celebrate those small wins. Take a minute and take them in, and then recognize what it is that you did to get you to that point. And that is a really great way to kind of dampen down that thought distortion, which is associated with the imposter syndrome.
Brian, do we have enough Slido questions now to give the audience a chance?
Great questions coming in. So the first one for Mr. Risman and Professor Holbrook. So do you see a contrast in behavioral health resources between the time that you were in law school and now? And what are your thoughts on when and how to engage in those resources? We've touched a little bit on this, but would appreciate the perspective.
When I was in law school, there was the top 10% and the bottom 90%. And the resources went to the top 10% and the bottom 90% were forgotten. And there were no academic counseling, there was no emotional counseling. You were on your own. And about 10 of us in my class had fought in Vietnam. And coming back from Vietnam to the States, that was like having a target painted on you. Society was very unhappy with former soldiers. And so we never talked to each other about our experiences in Vietnam. So what would have been a natural support group didn't ever coalesce. And I'm so pleased, Parker, and that you've accomplished so much trying to make this a positive atmosphere. My sense, and you may have a better sense of this than I do, is that the true buy-in from top to bottom of students is really quite strong, and that people don't feel abandoned or ignored or left out.
Yeah, I certainly that is the hope I would imagine for all students, the way that we feel towards students, but also I think in the legal profession, right, from new associates to more seasoned professionals, that there is and should be a spot at the table for everyone. Mark, any comments to add on that?
Well, again, I wasn't prepared for health and well-being, but I concur with what Professor Holbrook just said, but adding to it, in the difference in 4 years between when he and I attended law school, in my freshman year, they increased minority enrollment, and approximately 10% of the class was either Hispanic or African American. And I think it was the first time it was done at the U Law School. And by the end of the first year, 13 of those 15 students dropped out. So yeah, there was very little support. There was a placement office where they tried to assist us in getting jobs. There was a student a year ahead of me by the name of Ted Bundy who probably could have used a little psychological consulting, either in law school or outside, but it was non-existent, and obviously it is a big part now of the university experience for law students. But like Professor Holbrook said, it was really non-existent, and I think a lot of us today, I know the Nevada Bar always had assistance for attorneys with drinking and substance abuses. I think that recently they've had assistance for attorneys with gambling habits and abuses, but that's about it. So I really, I can tell you what it was like before, but I'm happy I don't know as much as Parker about what's going on now.
Thank you, Mark. Another question, and maybe, for maybe the whole panel, I think would appreciate your insight on this. I think it used to be taught and hammered in law school to represent your client zealously. That phrase may have phased out to some extent at this point, but how do we engage in civil and professional ways and still advocate strongly for our clients and to represent them? How do we strike that balance?
Real quickly, I think I addressed that. Just bite your tongue or, chant, whatever you have to do, but always exhibit it toward opposing counsel, toward bailiffs, or toward judges, toward juries, toward the other parties. It can really be part of you without reducing your role of being a zealous advocate. A lot of it has to do with the tone of your voice, and you can ask a very great question on cross-examination or make a killer deal point in a negotiation with a smile on your face and a pleasant tone. And if your tone is harsh, if you've got a scowl on your face, the message you're trying to give or the point you're trying to make can get lost.
I also think remembering what type of advocate you are. Sometimes, like I said, I practice family law. It's high emotion, and people confuse being a zealous advocate and being aggressive with being a jerk, talking over opposing counsel, talking over your client, not engaging. And sometimes your client is the person that's pushing that's like whispering to you, call her a liar in open court. And you have to tell your client, I'm not going to do that. That's not like who I am. And that's not going to get you very far in court. The lawyers that, in my opinion, that come into court and they're kind of all over the place and they're like yelling and they're, they don't want to shake your hand. Remember that law is a small community, and they kind of get the reputation of either they're a new lawyer or they don't know the culture of this bar, so they're not from here. And they really kind of don't know what they're doing, because lawyers who know what they're doing and who are zealously advocating for their client, they don't need to yell. They know the facts. They know how to present themselves in court. I think that there is this misconception that you have to be this aggressive lawyer that you see on TV and you're going to cut people off and be rude. That's not advocacy, and that's not good lawyering. So I think getting a good mentor and really understanding what defines advocating for your client and how to present yourself in court, in an office, in a deposition is really helpful.
I tried about 6 or 7 cases in front of Judge Jenkins, and he had an expression that the best argument is a good explanation. And that always struck me as true. And he also said that lawyers are educators. They're not advocates, they're educators first. And that's the best way to be an advocate, is to teach the court, teach opposing counsel, teach your client. And I've tried to incorporate his advice in what I did.
So a question for Parker. How do you deal with the toxicity of students, stress bragging? And I think this actually question probably applies into practice as well. How do you deal with coworkers, maybe who exhibit some of those same things? Thoughts on that, or advice you'd give?
I think the only thing I can say is don't be that person. That's it. I mean, honestly, like if you're the kind of person that is going out of your way to express, what you're doing and how good you are, or I don't know, instead of trying to build other people up, then, like was mentioned, there's a reputation there, and there's people talk, and it's a small community, and you just don't want to be that person. It brings other people down. It brings yourself down. And all of a sudden, that support that you thought you had is gone because you bring them down. So don't be that person.
Fine advice. Martha, you look like you want to say something.
Oh, yeah. I love the competitive stress. Like, what is that? It was around when I was a law student practicing, and I guess it's still out there. The whole my stress is worse than your stress. I know you think you're stressed, but let me tell you about all the work that I have. You only slept 3 hours. I only slept 1. Okay, that isn't something to be like psyched about or proud about, because if you get less than 5 hours of sleep a night, studies show it's like shotgunning 6 cans of beer before you go in the office. So if you want to be the best advocate you can be, you want your moneymaker to make you money, your brain, you want it all to work well, you need to be building recovery into your days. You need to have those boundaries. You need to take care of yourself. Sure, there are times that, like before a trial or something, that you have to turn on the jets. But this idea that somehow you're a better lawyer because you grind all the time is just false. And, in our organizations, if that is if that's the vocabulary that's used and that's what people are talking about, then that just self-perpetuates and everybody loses.
Martha, could we stick with you maybe just for one other question? We've talked a lot, we've touched on resources for law students. Can you tell a little bit about resources available to those who belong to the Utah State Bar and the work that you've done in that area?
Yes, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. The Utah State Bar has an incredibly robust well-being and mental health protection programs. So we have a lot of education that we do through the Wellbeing Committee and also through Lawyers Helping Lawyers. And the bar has put in place resources for active bar members to use. One of them is called Tava Health. And that is access to high quality therapeutic services in a really short time frame. And so you get on going, you can find all the information on how to get on these things through the website, but Tava Health, you can typically get in within 5 business days and see a therapist. You can pick your therapist, and it's available through telehealth. It's incredibly effective, and we have had an overwhelming response to that service. The bar is providing 6 no-cost sessions per calendar year. And if you use your 6, you can then continue to use Tava Health services to your therapist for either out of pocket of $125 or through your insurance. So that is a hugely successful benefit. And I am a huge fan of therapy. I have used it for myself. It's now part of my toolkit to keep me in a good place to where I'm functioning on all levels. So that's one thing. The other one is Unmind, which the law students have access to this as well. You can download it through the App Store, and there's over 400 tools and lessons on there that can help you keep yourself healthy, right? So, because mental health and well-being is a spectrum. It's not just, mental health is not the absence of ill health. It is adding all the strengths, adding all the capacities, all the good things in life. So, it's really a spectrum between barely hanging on and thriving and everywhere in between. And guess what, people? If you are a human being, you have mental health, you are on that spectrum. So Unmind helps us stay healthy, handle challenges, and improve our health. So I check that out. Again, on the website, you can find out information, but download the app from wherever. It's Utah State Bar or your companies on both of these benefits. And for Unmind, it's your bar ID. So third thing, we have a Lawyers Helping Lawyers organization associated with the bar that is a confidential peer-to-peer support system that lawyers can use, paralegals can use to get connected with another lawyer that has gone through whatever it is you're going through. We have volunteers to help with stress, to help with substance use issues, depression, anxiety, grief. You name it, we either have or will find a volunteer to talk to you about this, and that is completely confidential, as same with Unmind and Tava. So it's like Fight Club. What happens with Lawyers Helping Lawyers stays there under the rules. It cannot be reported to OPC, anything like that. So make use of these benefits. They're awesome.
Right. Thank you. Professor Holbrook, we have just a few minutes. Any closing comments or questions for the panelists?
I want to thank all the panelists and you, Brian, for putting together, I think, a really interesting and useful program. And Marc, we wish you and your colleagues in the bar in Las Vegas Godspeed in light of this terrible tragedy that you've just recently experienced. But thank you, Marc, for being a part of the panel.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Marc and other panelists. Professor Holbrook, thank you so much for taking time